For 11 months I thought Sergeant Delacob was a joke. We all agreed to keep telling. That's the honest place to start, because if I dress it up any kinder than that I'd be lying, and she would have hated a lie more than she ever hated the joke. The joke was this. Before every convoy rolled out the wire at Fob Mercer, the drivers and the gunners would line up at her truck and reach in through the window and rub her shoulder. 2 fingers, sometimes a whole palm, the way you'd rub a smooth river stone you'd carried in your pocket since you were a boy. Then they'd climb into their cabs feeling like the day couldn't touch them. They called her the rabbit's foot. They called her our luck. And nobody on that whole base could have told you what her actual job was, and I include myself in that, and I'm ashamed to say I include the officers too. I was 19 years old when I got there, a private first class with a ring of sunburn where my helmet didn't sit right, and the first thing anybody taught me wasn't how to clear a stoppage on the .50 caliber, which you'd think would be the priority for a man whose entire purpose was to stand up out of a hatch and work a machine gun. No, the first thing they taught me was the shoulder rub. A corporal named Diaz walked me down the line of trucks the night before my first run. The motor pool at night is a strange church, all those big diesel animals sleeping in rows, ticking as they cooled, the smell of fuel and dust and old canvas, the floodlights making hard pools of white with the dark pressing in between them. Diaz had been in country 8 months and carried himself like 8 years, the way the ones who have come back enough times start to carry themselves, and he stopped me at the lead truck, the one painted with a faded gun number on the door, and he said, real serious, not a flicker of a smile, "You rub the sergeant's shoulder before we roll, Holloway, or you stay home. That's not a suggestion. That's how we all come back." She was sitting up in the cab with a little notebook open on her knee, writing something in a hand so small and so cramped that from where I stood it looked like ant tracks crossing the page. She didn't look up. She just turned her shoulder a half-inch toward the open window, the way you'd offer your hand to be shaken when you were in the middle of something else, and let me do it. I felt like an idiot. I was a grown man, or near enough, and I reached in and touched a sergeant's shoulder through the dusty sleeve of her blouse like I was patting a statue at a shrine, and I mumbled something, I don't even know what, and she said, without looking up from her aunts, "Welcome to Talon, Holloway. Watch the culverts on the Market Road tomorrow." The kids stopped playing by the 3rd one. That was it. Then she went back to her writing. I didn't know what that meant. I walked away thinking she was strange. I said as much to Diaz once we were clear of her truck. I said something like, "She's a little off, isn't she?" The cocky thing a 19-year-old says to sound like he's been around, and Diaz didn't laugh the way I expected. He just looked at me sideways and said, "She's our luck, man. Luck's allowed to be strange." And there was a warning in it under the easy words that I was too green to read. I'd learn to read warnings later. She'd teach me, though she'd never know she did. Let me tell you about the company before I tell you about the day, because the day only means what it means against the long, dull backdrop of all the days that came before it, and you have to understand the dull part first. We were a transport company. That's the unglamorous truth of it. We hauled the dull blood of an army across a hard country, fuel and water and mail and ammunition and spare parts, and the 1,000 boring things a fighting force burns through just to stay standing, never mind to fight. Our road was Route Talon, a main supply route that ran from Fob Mercer out through the market town of Kale Bazaar, across a wide dry riverbed they called the Wadi, and up into the high ground to a string of outposts that depended on us the way a body depends on its own slow pulse. We ran it again and again and again. Out before dawn, back before dark when we could manage it, 40 trucks give or take strung along the road like a long brown animal, every day the same and every day not, because a road is never the same road twice, and the not same is exactly the part that kills you. And here is the fact that built the legend. In the time before I arrived and in the 11 months I served in that company, we did not lose a single truck to the road. Not one. We got stuck. We broke down. We got cussed at over the radio for being slow, and we were slow, gloriously, maddeningly slow sometimes, and the outposts howled about it and the colonel howled about it, and we crawled along anyway. But we did not get hit. In a war where the road itself was the enemy more often than any man with a gun, where buried shells and culvert bombs took more of us than firefights ever did, our company crossed that ground every single day and came home whole. Men cannot live with luck like that and not explain it. It's not in us. A run of fortune that good starts to feel like a debt you're racking up, and you go looking for the reason you've been spared so you can keep paying into it. And the men in that company had found their reason, and her name was Sergeant Cobb, and her shoulder was where you paid. She let them believe it. That's the part I think about most now, all these years later, the part that took me longest to understand and that I understand best of all. She let 400 men think she was a rabbit's foot when she was, in plain and undecorated fact, the most disciplined soldier I have ever watched do a job. She let them rub her shoulder. She let them call her luck. Because, and I only worked this out much later, sitting with it the way you sit with the big things long after the man or woman who taught them to you is gone, because a man who believes in luck still flinches at the right time. He still ducks. He still listens, a little in the animal part of him, to the one who carries the luck. The superstition kept the company careful in exactly the way she needed it careful, and the truth, if she'd told it plainly, would only have embarrassed them and made them stop listening out of pride. So she took the joke. She wore being a charm. She'd be a punchline forever if the punchline kept us breathing, and it did. Here's what I missed. What we all missed. What I'm ashamed to this day to have walked past for the better part of a year. That little notebook on her knee wasn't a diary. It was a logbook, and she kept one for every kilometer of route Talon, and she had been keeping them for 2 full years before I ever set foot on Mercer, since before nearly everyone in that company, and they were not a soldier's idle scribbles. They were a record of the road kept the way a careful doctor keeps a record of a patient he fully intends to keep alive. She logged the culverts, which ones ran under the road and which ones were dry, which had fresh dirt at the mouth and which were packed hard and pale by the sun and the rains, which one some hand had dug at in the night and packed loose again so it would settle wrong by morning. She logged the market in Kale Bazaar with the patience of a man counting his own money. Which stall sat where? Which mornings the bread seller opened his shutters and which he didn't, and why, whether it was a holy day or a wedding or something worse. She logged the children. I want to dwell on that because it took me longest to understand, and it is the truest thing about her. She logged the children, the way the man who sells you the road logs his own merchandise, because children are the most honest instrument that has ever existed in any war anywhere. Kids play where it's safe. They swarm a passing truck for candy where the world is ordinary, and they vanish quiet all at once, swept off the street by mothers who can read the wind better than any colonel, a full day before the grown men who love them even know to be afraid. An empty street where children should be is a thing screaming at the top of its lungs, and almost nobody in that country wearing our uniform had the ears to hear it. She did. She'd taught herself to. She'd logged it for 2 years. She logged the goat herd that crossed the wadi at the same dusty hour every morning, the same ragged boy driving it with the same switch, and she logged the morning it did not cross, and what that meant, which was that the boy and his father and everyone in that family knew something the United States Army did not. She read the ground the way you and I read a human face, without effort, without even knowing we're doing it, the whole story of a man written in the set of his mouth, and we just know. That was her with the road. And when she looked up from her ant tracks on my very first night and said, flat and unhurried, the kids stopped playing by the third culvert, she had not been strange at all. She'd been telling me, a brand new gunner she'd known for 90 seconds, the precise patch of God's earth where I was going to die the next day if nobody listened to her. I just didn't have the ears yet. I thought she was odd. I'd thank her for that warning every day for the rest of my life if I could, and I can't, so I'm telling you instead. I want to tell you about the day I almost got it. The day I came close to understanding her and didn't, because it sits in me like a stone. It was maybe my 4th month. We were rolling back through Kale Bazaar in the late afternoon, the whole market loud and ordinary, the air thick with diesel and old fruit and wood smoke, and the kids were out in their swarm at the candy corner the way they always were, a dozen of them running alongside the trucks with their hands up, laughing, calling the few words of our language they'd learned, which were mostly the words for candy and for friend. I was tossing them what I had the way you do, because they were kids and you were 19 and far from home, and a kid's laugh is a kid's laugh in any country on earth. And I happened to be looking down at the cab at her when she went still. I'd been around her stillness enough by then to feel it land, the way you feel a dog go quiet at your side before you've heard the thing the dog heard. She wasn't watching the kids who were there. She was watching a gap. There was a stretch of the market, maybe 40 meters of it past the fountain, where the kids weren't, where they should have been and weren't, a clean, empty lane in the middle of all that noise like a missing tooth, and I'd looked right at it and seen nothing because I didn't know it was a thing to see. She keyed the radio, calm as Sunday. "Gun 1, we're taking the south lane out past the well, not the fountain road, pass it back." And the column did. 40 trucks peeled south past the well instead of running the fountain road like we always did. No fuss, a minor thing, a slightly longer way home, and the captain wasn't on that run so nobody questioned it. And we got back to Mercer, and I forgot about it inside an hour because nothing had happened. Nothing happened. That was the whole event. Nothing happened on the fountain road that day because we weren't on it. 2 days later, another company took the fountain road, and the fountain road came apart under their lead vehicle, and it was bad. And we heard about it on the net. And I stood there in the motor pool listening with a cold thing crawling up my back. Because I remembered the empty lane past the fountain that I'd looked at and not seen. And I remembered her going still. And I remembered past the well, not the fountain road. And I understood for one clear, terrible second that she had walked us around a grave 2 days before it was dug. And then this is the shameful part. I let myself stop understanding it, because it was easier. Because the other thing, the thing the whole company believed, required nothing of me. I went down the line that next morning and I rubbed her shoulder for luck like everybody else, and the cold clear second passed, and I let it become luck again in my own head because luck doesn't ask you to learn anything and seeing doesn't let you sleep. I was 19. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of how a man talks himself out of the thing he's seen, and I've watched older and wiser men than me do the same, so I tell it plainly and let it stand. I was one of the men who thought she was a charm. I touched her shoulder, and I thought I was the one doing her the favor. The captain thought it too, in his own way, and the captain outranked her, which is where the real trouble lived. His name doesn't matter, and I won't give it, because what he became later earned him the mercy of not being named for what he was first. He was a good officer by most of the ways the manual measures a man. He cared about his soldiers, genuinely. You could see it in 100 small ways, the way he'd walk the aid tent after a hard run, the way he knew the names of the youngest privates. He kept his trucks rolling. He answered to a colonel, and the colonel answered to a timetable, and that timetable was a living thing with teeth, and it ate at him every single day of his life. The outposts in the high ground needed fuel by a certain hour or the generators died, and when the generators died, the radios died with them, and a unit gone dark on the radio in that country was a unit you might never hear from again, and he carried that, all of it, every hour. A convoy that halted on the road was a convoy doing nothing while the clock ran, and he feared the clock more than he feared anything the clock might be hiding, because the clock he could see, and the other thing he could not. So when Sergeant Cobb would key her radio in that flat, unhurried voice and say, "Gun 1, recommend we hold," what he heard was a delay. He heard the clock. He'd ask her why, and she'd give him a thing he could not put in a report. The herd's gone. The bread sellers shut on a baking day. There's fresh fill at the third culvert that was packed hard on Tuesday. And to a man trained his whole career to distrust feelings and trust intelligence, real stamped intelligence with a source and a grid behind it, she was handing him goats. She was handing him an empty bread stall. She was handing him the silence of children, and he could not for the life of him write any of that on a form and send it up to a colonel who'd ask him, reasonably, why a 40-truck serial was sitting motionless in the open burning daylight over a feeling. I heard him say it to her once on the fob between runs, and it wasn't cruel, which somehow made it land harder. He wasn't a cruel man. He came up to her at her truck where she was doing the thing she was always doing, writing in the book, and he said, "Sergeant, I respect what you do for the men's morale. I do. They love you, and I'm not too proud to say that love is worth something out here. But I cannot stop a 40-truck serial in the open because a herd of goats took the day off. You understand that. You're a professional. Give me something I can write down. Give me a grid, give me a source, give me a threat, and I'll halt the whole column and answer for it gladly. Give me a feeling, and I can't. That's the job." And she looked at him for a long moment, and I was close enough to see her face, and I swear to you I watched her decide not to say the thing she could have said, which was that she had 2 years of something written down, a whole footlocker of it, the road read and logged and proven, and that he had never once in those 2 years asked to read a single page. She could have said it. She had every right to. She just said, "Yes, sir," even, quiet, and she went back to her book. That was the disrespect, if you want it named, and the niche of my own life requires it named, so I'll name it plainly. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't a sneer in the mess hall. It was something quieter and in a way crueler. She was the most capable soldier on that route, and they had turned her capability into a charm. They'd taken the hardest, most relentless, most thankless work I have ever seen a human being do, and they'd called it luck, and they rubbed it on their shoulders for free. And the one man with the rank to actually use what she knew waved it off as a feeling, because it didn't come with a stamp. She was invisible in the most complete way a person can be invisible, invisible by being beloved for the wrong thing. She never once complained about it. Not to me, not to anyone I ever heard. But she did something about it quietly in the only way left to her, and that thing is what saved us. She made us able to save ourselves, and she dressed it up as superstition so we'd never feel the weight of it until the weight came down. This is the part that, when I finally understood it, sat me right down. The brief. Every so often, on the dull afternoons when nothing was rolling, Sergeant Cobb would gather the drivers and the gunners in the shade of the motor pool and walk us through what she called, in her flat way, the bad day. She'd have a stretch of dirt smoothed out and she'd scratch the road into it with a stick. "Here's Talon. Here's the bazaar. Here's the wadi. Here's the bridge," and she'd say, "If it ever goes wrong in the low ground, here is what we do, and we do it without thinking, because in the low ground thinking is too slow." And she'd lay it out. Nobody stops in the wadi. Nobody. You do not stop in the killing ground no matter what, because a stopped truck in a kill box is a coffin and a moving truck is a chance. Every truck behind the lead follows gun one's exact track, wheel in the wheel. Because she'd already found the one line out. You peel right at the broken well up the old goat trail onto the high hard ground, the line she'd walked herself on foot, the ground that wouldn't bog a loaded truck, the high line that would put the banks below you instead of above you and turn your speed back into a weapon. And she'd make us say it back, one at a time, every driver, every gunner, until 40 men could recite the bad day in their sleep. And we grumbled. God help me, we grumbled, because it was hot and it was a dull afternoon and we wanted to be anywhere else. And we did it anyway, every man of us, for the same reason we rubbed her shoulder, because she was our luck and you humor your luck. None of us knew why she drilled it so hard. She never told us. She never said the word ambush, never said the words kill box, never frightened a single private with the real shape of the thing she was preparing us for. She just made us able, cold in our sleep, to do the one and only thing that would carry us out of a trap. And she let us think it was a charm's little ritual, one more strange thing the rabbit's foot wanted, and we did it to keep the luck happy. And the luck was keeping us alive the whole time and never said so. I drove that bale route in drills a dozen times, I could have done it blind. I had no idea I was rehearsing the most important 90 seconds of my life. She knew. She always knew. She just couldn't tell us, because the moment she told us the why of it, the fear would have gotten into the company, and a frightened convoy is a slow convoy, and a slow convoy dies. And so she carried the why alone, in a notebook, in a footlocker, in that flat, quiet voice, for 2 years, and let 400 men thank their lucky stars. I started to suspect, near the end of my 11th month, that there was more to her than the joke. It was a small thing. I'd come back to the motor pool late one night for a glove I'd left, and the light was on in the little connex she used as an office, and the door was cracked, and I saw her in there alone. No audience, no men to perform luck for, bent over a long folding table absolutely covered in those notebooks, and a hand-drawn map of Route Talon the size of a door pinned to the wall behind her, every culvert numbered, every kilometer annotated in that tiny ant hand, colored marks I didn't understand. A whole secret architecture of the road that no one on that base knew existed. She had a ruler. She was measuring something, sighting along it with one eye closed, transferring a number from a notebook to the big map, and her face in the lamplight was the face of a master at a craft, total, absorbed, 10,000 hours deep, and there was nothing of luck in it anywhere. It was work. It was the most work I'd ever seen. I didn't go in. I stood at the cracked door for a moment, and then I left my glove and walked away, and I think that was the night I started slowly to be ashamed, though I couldn't have told you of what. The day it all came down was a Tuesday in the deep of the dry season, when the dust hangs so thick in the air that the sun comes up the color of a bad coin, and the heat is already a flat hand on the back of your neck by 7 in the morning. We had a heavy load and a screaming timetable, the worst combination there is. The far outpost had gotten into a bad week, a real bad week, and they were burning through fuel and through ammunition faster than anyone had planned for, and they needed both badly by a hard hour, or men up there were going to be in the dark and out of bullets at the same time, which is the kind of arithmetic that turns a colonel into a hammer, and the colonel had been a hammer on the captain all night long over the radio. So we rolled heavy. Fuel, the volatile stuff, most of the column. 2 trucks of ammunition for the far post. 40 vehicles give or take, strung out along Talon in the bad coin light, and me up top on gun, one behind the 52nd truck from the very front, with Sergeant Cobb in the cab below me and a driver named Petey at the wheel, a good kid from Ohio who talked too much when he was scared and had gone very quiet. We came up on Kale Bazaar a little after 8, and the sergeant went still. I knew that stillness now. 11 months had taught me at least that much, even if I'd refused to learn the rest. I felt it land in the cab below me before I understood a single reason for it, the dog going quiet at my side, and I looked where she was looking, and I tried, for the first time in my life, to really see the market the way she saw it. And I want to tell you I succeeded, but I didn't, not all of it. I only caught the edges of what was loud and screaming to her. The bread seller's stall was shuttered. It was a baking day. The candy corner where the kids swarmed every single morning of my life on that road was empty, not thin, not quiet, empty, swept, a missing tooth in the noise of the market. And up ahead where the road dropped toward the Wadi crossing, the goat herd that clogged that ground at this exact hour every morning, the ragged boy and his switch and his animals, simply was not there. The crossing was clear, clear in a way it was never, ever clear. And around the mouth of the 3rd culvert under the road, where I had been taught on my very first night to watch, there was a skirt of fresh, dark, loose dirt that the morning before had been packed pale and hard by 2 years of sun. I saw it. That's the thing I hold on to for whatever small grace it's worth. On the last morning after 11 months, I finally saw it, a half-second before she said it, and the seeing turned my stomach to ice. She keyed the radio. All elements, gun 1, hold the column, hold it now, do not enter the Wadi. The captain's voice came back from somewhere in the middle of the serial, tired and stretched thin. Gun 1, give me a reason. We are 40 minutes down and the clock is real today. Sergeant, it is very real. The post is black on fuel. The market's empty, sir. The bread's shut on a baking day, the herd's gone from the crossing. There's fresh fill at the bridge and the third culvert that was packed hard yesterday. We are looking at a prepared position in the wadi. Recommend we hold here. I dismount, I clear the crossing on foot. 10 minutes, sir. 10 minutes. A long pause. I could hear him wrestling it. I could hear in the silence on the net a good man being torn in half by two fears, the one he could see and the one he couldn't, and the timetable with its teeth in him, and the colonel's voice still ringing in his ear, and 100 miles away a post going black. Sergeant. His voice was almost gentle, and that was the worst of it. Is there a threat or is there fresh dirt? Because I have a post that goes dark in 90 minutes and a colonel who will ask me which it was, and the goats took the day off, gets men killed sitting still in the open just as dead as moving gets them killed. We go fast. We go through the wadi at speed and we don't stop. That's the call. Gun one, you have my order. Move. I watched the back of her head in the cab below me. I have thought 1,000 times since about what I would have done in her place. I'd have spent that last 30 seconds being right. I'd have keyed the net and said I told you, said it's on you, sir, said the whole company's blood is on your timetable, because I was 19 and full of the cheap need to be proven right that costs nothing and saves no one. There's a kind of soldier who will spend the last half-minute before a disaster making sure history records that he saw it coming. She was not that kind. She was the other kind, the rarer kind, and in the breath she had left she didn't spend a single second of it on herself. She keyed the radio one last time, and her voice had not gone up half a note. It was the same flat, careful voice that had told me about the third culvert on my first night in the dark of the motor pool. All elements, gun one. We are pushing the wadi on the captain's order. Listen to me now. The instant anything happens, you do not stop in the low ground, you do not bunch up. Every truck follows gun one's exact track and we peel right at the broken well, up the goat trail, the hard line, the bad day, just like the brief. Drivers, say it back to me. Now. And they said it back. I will go to my grave hearing it. One after another, around the whole long column, 40 drivers' voices came up on the net, calm, every one of them calm, because she had walked them through it on a dozen dull afternoons until it lived in their hands below the level of fear. Gun 3, hard ground at the well, follow your track. Gun 7, no stopping, peel right. Gun 14, the goat trail, copy. Around and around, the whole serial reciting the bad day back to her in the last quiet half-minute before the bad day arrived. And not one of them, I'd bet my life, fully understood until that instant that the silly drill the rabbit's foot had made them memorize was the only reason any of them would see tomorrow. We went into the wadi fast. I'll tell you what an ambush is for those who have been spared one, and I hope you've been spared one. It is not a battle. Battle is too fair a word, and there is no fairness anywhere inside the thing. It is the world deciding in the space of a single breath to come apart at every seam at once. The lead truck, the very first one, ahead of us, was perhaps a third of the way across the dry riverbed when the road under its front axle stood up. That's the only honest way I have to say it, even now. The ground stood up. A wall of dust and a pressure I felt in my teeth and in my chest before the sound of it ever reached my ears, and the lead truck was sideways and stopped and wrong. And in the same instant the guns opened up from the high banks on both sides at once, the way they only do when men have had 2 full nights to dig in and lay their fire and range every meter of the low ground and wait, patient, for the long brown animal to put its head in the box. And I understood, in one sick clarifying flood, that every single word out of that woman's mouth that morning had been true, exactly and completely true. And the Captain 40 trucks back understood it in the same instant. And the only difference between us and her was that she had spent 2 years getting ready to be right on this exact morning, and we had spent those 2 years rubbing her shoulder for luck. I don't remember deciding to fire. The 50 was just going under my hands, finding the muzzle flashes on the right bank, the long heavy hammer of it, and the world was noise and dust and the smell of cooking metal. What I remember, what I'll always remember, clearer than my own mother's face some days, is her voice below me, coming up through the open hatch and over the net at the very same time, and it had not gone up half a note. Not half a note. The whole world was ending, and her voice was the voice from the first night in the dark motor pool. Peel right, Wells at your 2 o'clock. Gun 1 moving. Follow my track, exactly my track. Do not stop in the low ground. Push, push, push. Petey drove and she navigated and I served the gun, and we did not stop. That's the whole miracle if you want one, and it isn't a miracle at all, which is the point of this entire story. We did not stop. The long animal of the convoy did not stop. It bent. She took gun 1 hard off the road to the right at a dead run, the truck slamming and bucking over the rough ground, past the burning lead vehicle. And we did not leave that crew. I want that on the record. The trucks right behind us grabbed the lead crew out of the dust under fire and dragged them aboard and kept moving. Nobody, not one man, was left in that wadi. And up the Old Goat Trail she'd made 40 drivers memorize on a dozen dull afternoons. The hard, pale ground that wouldn't swallow a loaded truck. The high line that lifted us up out of the box and put those dug-in guns below us instead of above us, where their fire went wide and high, and where our speed came back to us like a gift. And behind us, one by one, exactly as she'd briefed, exactly as they'd said it back to her 30 seconds before the world stood up, the trucks followed her track, wheel in the wheel. No one stopped. No one bunched. 40 drivers drove the bad day they'd rehearsed in their sleep, up out of the killing ground and onto the firm high earth where a moving truck is a chance and not a coffin, and the kill box she'd been overridden into went off all around men who were already climbing out of it. I learned the rest later, the architecture of it, the part you couldn't see from behind a gun in the dust. She had prearranged that bale route. The Goat Trail wasn't a guess. She'd walked it on foot, weeks before, alone, the way I'd seen her sight along a ruler in the lamplight, and she knew to the meter where it firmed up and where it would bog and which line a loaded truck could take at speed. The Overwatch. There was a heavy gun truck riding the tail of the serial that morning, and it had taken a position on the high ground at the mouth of the wadi that I'd thought was random, and it was not random. She'd put it there. She'd ordered the march so that the one truck best able to put heavy fire onto those banks was exactly where it needed to be to cover the company climbing out. The load order itself, the fuel, the volatile stuff riding protected in the belly of the column, the heavier guns on the flanks where the fire would come from, that was hers too, set that morning before we ever rolled, so that when the box went off, it went off against the part of us best armored to survive it. None of it was luck. None of it was that morning. It was 2 years. When the worst day of all our lives finally came for us, she had already lived it 100 times on paper, in a notebook full of ant tracks, in a Connex with a door-sized map. And so when it came for real, she did not have to think and she did not have to be afraid, because thinking is too slow in the low ground and fear is slower still. She only had to read aloud, calm, from a thing she had already written. The rabbit's foot was a woman who had done all of our worrying for us, 2 years in advance, alone, and asked for nothing but a shoulder to be rubbed. We lost the lead truck, the vehicle itself, burned out in the wadi. We did not lose its crew. We took wounded, and I won't dress that up smooth for you, because she'd hate it and they earned better men were hurt, and some of it was bad. And in the hard shade of the high ground on the far side, we worked on them while the medics did what medics do, that fierce, focused gentleness that is the best thing men are capable of being. But 40 trucks went down into that wadi, and 40 trucks came up out the far side, every single one, the fuel intact, the ammunition intact for the post that needed it, every man accounted for in breathing, because one sergeant had read a shuttered bread stall and an absent goat herd and a skirt of fresh dirt, and because she'd had the strange, deep humility to teach 400 men to save themselves, and let them call it a charm so they'd never have to carry the fear she carried alone. The captain found her at the rally point about an hour later. I was close enough to see all of it, and I've never told it the same way twice because some things are too big to fit in the same words twice, but I'll tell it to you now as true as I can. She was down on one knee beside a wounded driver, holding a bag of fluid up with one hand so it would run, and writing in the notebook with the other. Already writing. An hour after the Wadi men still being worked on around her, and she was logging it, the fill, the firing positions on the banks, the range, the way the box had been laid, getting it all down while it was fresh so that the next convoy through that ground, the one she might not even be on, would know what she knew. That was who she was, all the way down. She was already taking care of soldiers she'd never meet. The captain walked up and stood over her, and for a long moment that man could not say one single word. She looked up at him, and here's the thing I've turned over more than any other piece of that whole day, the thing I most want you to understand about her. She didn't say, "I told you." I have run that minute back 10,000 times, and I keep waiting for her to say it, because it was true and it was earned, and I would have said it with everything I had. She didn't. There was nothing left in her to say it with. She'd worn herself all the way down to the floorboards getting 40 trucks out of a sprung trap, and whatever triumph another soul might have felt simply wasn't in her, and maybe never had been. She just looked up at him over the bag of fluid and waited, and let him be the one to speak. And the captain took off his helmet. Out there in the open, with the dust still hanging gold in the afternoon light and the wounded still being worked on, that officer removed his cover and stood bareheaded in front of a sergeant. I don't know how to make that land for someone who never wore the uniform, so I'll just tell you plainly. It is a thing you do not do. There is a whole world of meaning in it that a soldier feels in his chest before his head can name it. It is what a man does when he has run all the way out of rank and has nothing left in his hands to offer but respect, naked, with the cover off. He held the helmet against his chest. His voice, when it finally came, was wrecked all the way through. He said, "Show me the book." She handed it up to him. He turned the pages there in the gold light, the culverts, the children, the bread seller, the goat herd. 2 years of the road read like a face, and the disaster of that morning, predicted in a hand so small he had to lean in close to read it. And I watched a grown man understand, all at once and all the way down, that the luck his company had bragged on for 2 years had been a person. A person doing the hardest and quietest and most thankless work he had ever laid eyes on, in plain sight, in front of everyone, while every man she carried patted her on the shoulder on his way past, and thanked his lucky stars, and never once asked to read the book. He closed it careful like it was made of glass, and he gave it back to her with both hands. Then he straightened up to his full height, and he came to attention, and in front of every man within sight of that rally point, the wounded and the ones tending them and the drivers leaning gray-faced against their trucks, he saluted her. A captain, to a sergeant, which is backwards. Which is not how any of it is done. Which is precisely why not one man who saw it has ever been able to forget it as long as he's lived. And then he said the only thing left on this earth that could have meant more than the salute. "The road's yours, Sergeant. Nobody rolls Talon without your reed. Not while I'm in command, not ever." She returned the salute. Quiet. Not to him, I always felt, not really. She returned it the way you'd return it to the road itself, or to the 40 trucks, or to the wounded man whose fluid she was still holding up with her other hand the whole time. And then she went back to writing in the book, because the next convoy still had to be kept alive, and the keeping of it didn't stop just because the world had finally, for one afternoon, seen her. I'll tell you what the men did after. For 11 months we had rubbed her shoulder for luck. Every dawn, the long line at her window, the 2 fingers, the smooth river stone ritual, the rabbit's foot. And after the Wadi, when she'd walk the line in the cold dark before a convoy with that notebook under her arm, nobody reached through the window anymore. Nobody rubbed her shoulder. The whole company stood up. The drivers, the gunners, the mechanics, the brand new privates who didn't even know the story yet but felt the weather of it coming off the older men. They came to their feet when Sergeant Cobb walked the line, the way you stand up for the flag, the way you stand up for the fallen. The way a man stands for the small and uncounted number of people in this life who have quietly carried him for years, and let him call it luck so the carrying wouldn't frighten him. I was one of them, every single morning after, standing at attention by my truck in the cold while she came down the line reading the ground I still couldn't read, keeping us alive in a language I'd been too young and too easy to learn. And she'd reach my truck and nod at me once, just once, and I would have followed that woman into the open mouth of anything on God's earth. She never did get the luck talk out of them entirely. Soldiers are soldiers, and the word stuck around the way old words do, but it changed in their mouths. It stopped being a joke. It got quiet and it got reverent, the way you say a thing you finally understood the price of. By the time my tour ended and they put me on a bird home, the men in that company didn't say she was our luck anymore, not the old way, not as a charm to rub on a shoulder. They said luck was just the word the rest of us used, before we knew her name.